Hey fearsome friends. Part 4 of I Made a Deal with an Old Man will be out tomorrow. But in the meantime, here's 8 truly disturbing kidnapping stories to reinforce that stranger danger we should all instill in our kids. So sit back, relax, and get cozy, comfy, warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in. So when my brother and I were about 10 years old, we were on vacation visiting our great-grandmother in Ansted, West Virginia. It's a very close-knit, small mountain town where everyone knows everyone else, and a very good community overall. But even today, West Virginia is a strange place to visit. It's like taking a step back in time. As most of the towns in the mountains, the people live off the grid, and there's poor cell service. So 20 years ago when this happened, there was zero signal anywhere and everyone had landlines. We had spent most of our summers visiting here, so we knew some of my great-grandma's neighbours and their kids. We would run around with them, just doing kid stuff. But the coolest game to play was flashlight tag. We'd run around the hills and trails around my great-grandma's house and neighbourhood, just having a blast. Our cousins were here with us this year. And I remember one day, my dad sat me and all the kids down and told us something. Okay kids, I want to tell you that there is a police search going on for a possible kidnapper in the area, and he drives a light blue truck with a built-in wooden bed, and they think one of the doors is white. If you see this truck, come straight home. It kind of went in one ear and out the other, but the week ended up flying by, and it was our last couple of nights there. My brother Aaron, myself, and my cousin John decided to go out to meet our friend Garrett to see if we could play flashlight tag by the small river that ran down the mountainside of the neighbourhood. By the time we walked down the dirt road, though, it had already started to rain, so we had to sprint to get to Garrett's house. But before we knew it, we were soaked, and it was a full-blown thunderstorm. We actually couldn't see much, so instead of being smart and knocking on our friend's door, we ran to his cool tree house, which was rather nicely built and knew was dry inside. We climbed up and decided to flash our flashlights at Garrett's windows until we got his attention. We were just about to do that when my brother grabbed my flashlight and turned it off, pointing at the road. Parked not far from the tree house, coming from the dirt road, was the truck that my dad had told us about. It was an old Chevy, almost white, but we could tell it was blue with one white door. It had this wooden box on the bed that looked like someone had tried to make it a makeshift truck camper. Its lights were off, and we could see the person inside just looking up at the treehouse. I could barely make it out, but he was an older man wearing a baseball cap, and I remember his face not making me feel good. We were terrified and had no way to alert anyone. It was still raining too, and we just didn't know what to do. The road the truck was on was the only way back to my great-grandma's house, and we were very confused, because it went up the mountain to a dead end, which was my grandma's house. Where could the truck have come from? We just walked down that road. So we waited, us 3 kids just peeking out of the window of this treehouse, wrapped in these old blankets, debating our plan of escape from the creeper in the truck watching us. We decided to make a run for Garrett's house after a half-an-hour standoff with this guy just staring at us. So my cousin John, who was older, decided he'd climb down the ladder and go knock on Garrett's door. His house was about 50 yards away from the treehouse, and we all agreed on it. But as soon as he started to climb down, the truck started moving without its lights on and began driving down the road towards us. We screamed at John to run, and he booked it towards Garrett's small house, which really was just a trailer. And he made it, but the truck had pulled over at the edge of the road as John was pounding on the door. My brother and I watched in horror as John banged for what seemed like forever. Then the door finally opened and Garrett's mom stood on the porch, looking out, and she told John to get in as it was storming. He quickly told Garrett's mom what was going on, but the truck had backed up as fast as hell as the door had opened and driven off. It was raining so hard we couldn't see the license plate, but I swore that there was actually no plate at all. We were taken inside and my great-grandma's house was called. My parents were told we were okay, and we had dinner at Garrett's house, but it was weird, because when we told the story, Garrett had said he'd seen that truck driving around our great-grandma's place a few times that week, and he just assumed it was our families from out of town. He hadn't known about the wanted truck or the missing children, and I believe my father ended up calling the cops to report the events, but I never knew what happened, and we eventually left for home to Michigan. I will never forget the way the man was watching us, and the more I think about it, the more I realize that he'd followed us as we walked down towards our friend's house, and he was most likely looking to take us and put us in his weird truck camper. I hope they ended up catching him. My parents didn't let us roam around the mountains or neighborhood after dark after that, but I'll never forget his shadowed face staring at us, and the strange box he had on his truck. I grew up in a pretty good age, just before phones and iPads took over childhoods, and my friends and I grew up in a small town on Lake Ontario, so we got into all sorts of shenanigans water-related. Be it jumping off the piers, making huge bonfires by the lake, or one of our favourites, sneaking around on the boats. Only the ones out of the water and not in use, though. They were kept off to the side of the actual marina, down a dirt road that hooked around a densely forested hill. It was early fall, so a lot of the boats were out of the water, and the marina was very quiet. I was probably 10, maybe 11 at the time, and my best friend, let's call him Ron, was about 9. It was late afternoon and we were on our way to climb onto some boats, the ones that hadn't been covered for the winter season yet. Now another way onto the road from the actual marina was down a pretty steep hill, and we would butt slide down it and approach the boats from behind, minimizing any chance of marina staff seeing us. We snuck over to them as normal, and Ron began ascending up the metallic scaffold that the boat was poised upon. When he reached the top, I began my approach, but upon climbing realized there was a car, which I can still picture clearly to this day. It was a blue Hyundai. Not sure of the model, but it was a 2-door, and a man in his early 30s maybe, very redneck, despite my lack of a better term, was sitting inside, staring at me climbing up this scaffolding. Now me obviously thinking I was in trouble, dropped down and Ron made his way back down too. I sent an apologetic wave, but the guy only returned a smile, a creepy smile, and began to roll down the window. "Now what are you boys doing?" he asked, in an almost sarcastic, witty tone. I didn't really give much of a reply, as I wasn't huge on talking to strangers. My mum pounded that one in. And I forget exactly what I did or said, but I just remember him laughing and getting out. He didn't look at all like marina staff, and he began to stroll towards us, removing cigarettes from his pocket. "You want to smoke?" he asked. 2 kids at the age of 9 and 11 years old. I looked at Ron with a "we should leave" desperation, which he was very much feeling as well. I don't remember if I'd said "no thanks" or just turned away, but as we began to walk behind the boats back down the dirt road towards the marina, he strolled behind us and asked in a demanding way if we wanted a ride. At this point, obviously, we started to book it as we were at fight or flight mode. I checked behind me to see if he was following, and through the boat scaffolds I could see him getting frantically back in his car. Then we could hear him peeling out and around on the rocky dirt road. I knew we couldn't make it back past the curve and to the marina before him, so I grabbed Ron and we started running the other way back towards the hill we'd slid down on our butts. He peeled off much quicker around the bend, and Ron and I flew up this hill faster than should have been possible. We booked it up the road to this tourist centre gym place that had recently been built, and we ran inside. Ron was full of tears, and the 2 girls working in there jumped right up to attend to us. I remember remaining fairly calm, and it was only about 30 seconds into explaining our story that we saw the blue Hyundai pull in, circle the empty parking lot, except for the staff vehicles, and stop for a second. One of the ladies ran out upon our confirmation of the vehicle, and he peeled off and away down the road. The police were then called, and Ron's older sister came to pick us up. I don't remember why, but I think my parents may have been out that night for something. But nothing ever came of the police reports, and as far as I know, this guy is still around, and that's really disturbing to me. Over the years, people have tried to argue with me, saying it was probably a boat owner or marina staff. But I'd lived there for years, and never seen him before. Plus, it was all just too strange, as he didn't seem to mind us being on the boats, offered us smokes and a ride, then peeled around to follow us, finally pulling into the tourist parking centre, where when almost confronted by an adult, suddenly took off. Anyway, there is the retelling of my story that I've been meaning to get out for a while. I'm really thankful I was there with Ron, as he was much younger, and this could have ended very differently. Thank you for listening, and teach your little ones to stay safe out there. Growing up, my school was about 5 kilometers away from my house, and I had to walk there because my parents would work until 7 p.m. every day. The walk would go through a huge forest, and I can probably count the number of times I encountered someone on my way on one hand. This specific time, though, has always stuck in my head, and looking back, I think I may have seen a kidnapping, or at least some children trying to escape one. I was 12 at the time, and it was late spring and very hot out. I was on my way home and had probably been walking for 1, maybe 2 kilometers, when I noticed a group of boys walking my way. The boys had no clothes on at all, and were carrying what looked to me like a bat, the animal, not the sports equipment. And there were 3 of them, 2 around the same age as me, 1 looking a little younger. They were flushed and sweaty, as if they had been running or walking for a while, and they were almost dragging the younger boy along, who seemed like he needed to rest. I just froze and looked at them confused. They were speaking a language I didn't understand, and I can speak both Spanish and English, and it was neither of those. The 2 older boys had olive skin with dark hair, whilst the younger one was more pale and blonde. One of the older boys tried to talk to me, but as I said, I couldn't understand whatever language they were speaking. So I said to him in both Spanish and English, "No puedo entenderte, I can't understand you." He seemed confused, but he didn't waste any time, and pointed at the big 1-liter bottle water I had in my backpack's side pocket, and shook his fists by his chest, as if he was begging me. I gave him the bottle, and he made sure the younger boy drank first. They finished off the water I had left in there, and nodded their heads as if to say thank you, before carrying on the way they were going. I carried on walking home then, but felt creeped out by whatever I had just witnessed. After another kilometer or 2, I came across a man. He was tall and thin and looked to be in his late 20s, early 30s. He was pale, but pale in a way that he looked ill or sick, and looking back, I think he may have been on something, but that didn't click for me at the time. When I saw him, I tried to keep my head down and keep walking, but he stopped me. Then in broken Spanish he said to me that he was looking for his little brothers, as they were lost, and he asked if I had seen them. I shook my head and he said, "Gracias," then carried on his way. I tried my hardest to walk normally, but as soon as he was out of sight, I began to run, and didn't stop until I reached my house. Once my parents got home, I told them what had happened, but they just shrugged it off and told me I shouldn't worry. When I insisted I was serious, though, my dad promised me he would call the police in the morning and tell them what I'd seen. If my dad did call them, I was never called in for further questioning. No police asked me for descriptions or anything, and my dad swears he reported it, but I have my doubts. I just wish they would have taken me seriously. When I was younger, around 11, 12 years old, I was almost kidnapped. I was out playing with my mates during the day, as school had been cancelled due to it heavily snowing the night before. The friends I was with all live only a 15 to 20 minute walk from my house in an open area, and I was walking down an alleyway close to my home as I always did. There are a lot of houses around there, and it was broad daylight, so of course I thought it would be safe. Now I don't know why, but when I was walking down the alleyway, I had a sudden urge to turn around. Just then I saw a bald man with a grey, scruffy beard, tanned and blue-eyed, and he was wearing a white t-shirt and jeans, and looked to be in his late 40s, early 50s. He was sprinting full speed at me with the scariest look I've ever seen on anyone's face, and I can still remember it to this day. Without hesitation, I shot off and sprinted literally for my life towards the end of the alley until I got to my house, and didn't turn back once. Luckily, I was pretty quick for my age, and had appropriate footwear for the snow, and I remember a small girl outside her house about 50 meters from the alleyway, asking if that man was chasing me. But I just ignored her and carried on sprinting. I have no idea how close he was to me, or if anyone had seen it, but it's really been playing on my mind now as I'm that much older, just how badly this could have gone. What if I hadn't felt the urge to turn around? Would I still be here now? The fact that I still live in the same house and the alleyway is visible from the back of my house is still extremely unsettling. I haven't been down there since, and I never will again. I take the longer route to get home these days. So the moral of this story is, no matter how safe you think you are, even in broad daylight with houses all around you, especially as a child, just take the long way home if it means you're going to be safe. I've never told this story to anyone before for some reason, and only in the last few months have I even remembered just how bad it actually was or could have been. Always trust your gut instinct. I'm going to start this story off by saying that at the time this happened, I was a 19-year-old sophomore in college. I was living on campus in their apartment-style dorms, and my college wasn't exactly in the nicest part of the city, so I'd usually drive a little bit farther to go grocery shopping, so I could be in a little bit more of a safer area. The night this happened, I was going to cook dinner, and realised I didn't have some of the spices I needed. Normally I would have just said forget it, and made something else, but the meat had already been thawed for a day or so, and I needed to cook it. I debated just going to the Walmart that was 2 minutes away from my campus, but it was getting late and I didn't want to go there by myself in the dark. That Walmart is right next to a major highway, and being a girl by herself, I felt uncomfortable risking it. So instead I went to the Walmart that was about 20 minutes away, a few towns over. I got to that other Walmart and bought my spices, along with a few other things, and checked out, no problem. By the time I was done, it was now completely dark out. I was back at the driver's side of my car and putting my few bags in the passenger seat, when I noticed a woman. She was African American, maybe in her 50s, and she was looking at the back of my car. At the time I drove a really old car, and if you knew your cars, you would be surprised that it was still running. I've had a few people in the past, older men usually, look at or come up and ask me about my car. So I figured that this was what the lady was doing, and I kind of ignored it, until out of the corner of my eye, I saw her come around my car and stop about 2 feet behind where I was standing. I was parked next to a parking lot median, so it's not like she was getting in a car next to me. "Excuse me," she said. I turned around saying, "Yes?" kind of prepared to answer, "What year or model is your car?" "My church is giving out leftover boxes of food from our food drive to people in need. Could I give you one? We have them in our car over there." This immediately set off an alarm in my head. I mean, she had just seen me put my groceries in my car. Why would I need something else if I'd just been shopping? Also, the churches and food pantries around my college were usually cleaned out after they'd had their shopping days, for the people who really relied on things like food drives. There was hardly, if ever, anything that was just left over. I had watched enough Criminal Minds and read enough Facebook posts to know that this felt like a human trafficking lure. I stuttered over my words a bit at first, trying to figure out what to say, but finally got out, "Oh, no thank you, but I'm good. I'd like to see it go to someone who really could use it." I felt like that was an okay response if she really was handing out boxes. "Are you sure?" she said. "They're just right over here in my car," taking a step and making the gap between us a little smaller. She took a step and made the gap between us a little smaller. I was panicking. As she stepped closer, I tried to nonchalantly put my hand in my bag and look for the small pocket knife my dad had given me, and my mind was racing as I tried to find it, but also tried to keep my face looking calm and not suspicious. I reiterated to her that I was good, and the box of food should go to someone who could really use it. She finally seemed to let up and said, "Okay, have a good night, God bless you," and all that. And I told her to have a good night as well. Then as soon as her back was turned, I got into my car and locked all the doors. As I pulled out of my parking spot, I noticed that the car she was walking to had 3 large men standing at the trunk of it, and they were barely illuminated by the parking lot lights. I think it was an early 2000s white Nissan, and as I tried to go down the parking lot aisle as fast as I could, I saw the men looking at the back of my car, just like the woman had. I then noticed where their eyes were shifted to, and it wasn't my car. They were looking at my license plate. Just as I got to the end of the aisle, waiting to turn, I saw 2 of the men in the front seats, and the other man and the woman got in the back. Their car started up then, and they began to pull out too. I was having a full-blown panic attack now. Just a week before, my friend had posted something on Facebook about how 2 men had followed her and her mum through Walmart. Again, I had watched enough crime shows to know that this wasn't painting a pretty picture, when I finally got my opportunity to turn. But they were coming up behind me. I made the quick decision to take a really odd way back to campus, making tons of turns and going through a lot of small streets, instead of taking one of the 2 main roads. I don't think I saw the car again after I pulled out of the parking lot, but I was definitely not risking it. By the time I got back to my college, I had calmed down a little and started to wonder, maybe you're overthinking this. Believe there are actually good people in the world. And I decided that if they were really giving out boxes of food, then hopefully it does go to someone in need. That was until I was walking behind my car and heading towards my building. There was an SF faintly written in white sidewalk chalk on the brown paint of my car. I was shocked and terrified, knowing that I'd definitely not put that there, and I said out loud, "Oh my God," as I practically dropped my bags on the ground and rushed to wipe the chalk off with the sleeve of my jacket. My car had been tagged. After a few seconds of wiping, the chalk was gone, so I locked my car, grabbed my bags, and raced into my building. I got into my dorm and saw the dinner I was supposed to make, but I had lost my appetite completely. I put everything away and went into my bedroom, still reeling over what had happened in the last 45 minutes. I sent the whole story as a Snapchat video to some of my friends who were just as shocked as I was. And my one friend, Sarah, said that she thinks SF stood for single female. It made sense, which made the whole experience that much scarier. I called my mum afterwards and told her everything that had happened, and by the end of the call she was sending me an Amazon package with pepper spray in it. I didn't go out after dark or by myself for about 2 weeks after that, and I'd have a friend from campus or work go with me, or I just wouldn't go at all. The whole situation was terrifying, but I think the strangest part about all of it was that I was supposed to have been in the safer area. I drove all the way to that Walmart because I had had a bad feeling about the one that was closest to me. so I started going to the Walmart that was closer to me after that, and I've never had a negative experience since. It's hard to believe that all the stuff I've seen on TV and the internet could have almost happened to me. So to preface this post, I'm a male and was 21 years old at 6'2" and 240 pounds, so not a small or weak-looking guy in the slightest. I was wanting to lose some weight for a while and had been going on walks, sometimes during the evening or very late at night. It was Florida, and it gets hot unless it's nighttime. And plus, like I said, I'm a big dude, so I had nothing to worry about. Or so I thought. One fateful night, I decided to go out walking around my neighbourhood around 3 a.m. in a big puffy jacket and black pants. And I feel like in this situation, I would be the creepy person someone would be scared of. My walk was going well as usual, and I was actually getting close to the end of it, when this old school wood-panelled car passed by and went into a driveway somewhat in front of me. I barely thought anything of it. 3 to 6 cars always go by on late-night excursions. But what happened next is what unsettled me. This van pulled back out of the driveway with its lights off after I'd passed by the drive. And luckily I wasn't listening to any music, or I wouldn't have heard it. The van then proceeded to pull out and drive towards me, then stopped right in front of me. By this point I know I didn't want to end up like some kind of horror movie character, so I booked it in the opposite direction. I went down an off-branching street and kept going down these random streets to give me as much time as possible. Then I ended up hiding in some random bushes in someone's yard, staying there for a little while. I wanted to text my mum, but I was scared and didn't want the light from my phone to give me away. So I watched for any sign of them, but there was nothing for 5 minutes. Just as you think the coast is clear though, boom, I heard a car coming down the street, and it was those assholes, but with their lights on this time. I was pretty well hidden in these bushes right against someone's house, so they just went by. But my heart was beating so fast and I was terrified. I waited for a little while longer, until I truly believed the coast was clear, and finally got back to my house. I woke up my mum and we called the cops. I gave them as much info as I could when they said they would patrol the neighbourhood, but I didn't hear anything else about it. I just can't help thinking about that event and what their motives were. I always try to debunk stuff like this, but all their actions pointed to wanting to do something to me. But what? I'm not a pretty young lady. I'm a very large, menacing dude. My neighbourhood is not even nice enough to rob. And what the hell was I going to have on me whilst walking at 2 a.m. anyway? I just can't help but think that maybe they didn't want to kidnap me or mug me, but kill me, and it still freaks me out to this day. This happened when I was a teenager at about 16, and I went to spend the night at my friend's house. It was a Friday night and we were hanging out, calling other friends and watching TV, and we ended up falling asleep really late. So Saturday morning is an older woman's cleaning day, and since there wasn't much to do until later that night, my friend's mom woke us up early, telling us we needed to help clean. I was over at her house so often I wasn't considered a guest, so she told us to get dressed and eat something before we went to the store. After getting dressed, my friend's mum sent us to the Walmart that was in another city and gave us some cash for the bus and to get cleaning supplies from Walmart. I always hated the bus and would rather walk everywhere because I know that weird stuff happens on the bus. So we got to the bus stop and didn't have to wait long until one came and we got on. It took us to the downtown bus station where we would transfer to another one, and we waited about 10 minutes to get on. But as soon as we got on the next bus, we noticed this disgruntled man shooting daggers right at us. I told my friend and we both wondered, why is that old guy staring at us? Then we just laughed about it and ignored it. While we were boarding the bus, however, we noticed that he'd also boarded and was sat a few seats behind us, where the seats turned to face in. For the whole 15-minute bus ride, we felt him staring at us. We were cracking jokes to each other about him quietly, saying that maybe he likes young girls, and we laughed. We felt we had to keep making jokes just to lighten the mood and deflect from the fact that we felt incredibly uncomfortable with his stares. Towards the end of the ride, he moved closer to us, and our eyes started bugging out as if we'd said to each other, "Did you see that?" He was far too close for comfort. Now this man was wearing a Bill Cosby-like sweater with the stripes. He had only hair on the sides of his head and was bald on top, with a salt and pepper mustache, dirty khaki pants, and dirty scratched-up brown boots. Once the bus stopped at the store, we rushed to get off and ran into it, but the man also got off at the store. Walking through and gathering the supplies we needed, we noticed the man following us. Towards the end of our trip, we had been at the checkout for a while and hadn't seen the man leave or pass by us since we had last seen him in the mop aisle. We started talking about how weird it was that he'd kept on us. Then we started joking about him being a kidnapper, just to get that eerie feeling of being stalked off our minds. We stopped at the subway and grabbed some sandwiches to eat whilst we waited for the bus to go back to her house. And as we walked towards the exit, the man was standing there. We passed him like we hadn't seen him, and sat at the bus stop outside the store, waiting for the bus that was coming in about 10 minutes. The man came out and stood on the other side of the small plastic structure that covers the bus stop for when it rains, and his phone began to ring. We were already feeling uneasy because of the whole situation being so creepy, but the icing on the cake was when he answered the phone. This man said in Spanish when he answered, "Estoy acá con dos nenas lindas. Venga y búscame," which translates to, "I'm here with two pretty girls, come get me," and he smiled at us after he hung up. I grabbed my friend and shouted, "Shit, I forgot something in the store. Your mum's going to be pissed if we don't get it." Then we ran back into the store, walked up to the service desk and told them that there was a man outside that had been following us since we'd gotten on the bus and through the store. They called management and the police, but the man was gone by the time anyone went outside. My friend's mum had to come pick us up from the store, and after that I never rode the bus again and would rather take a walk, bike, run or ride from a friend. So I want to start off by saying that this isn't my story. It's a messed up encounter from when my older cousin Dylan was a kid, and he told me about it recently. So I'm going to tell it from his point of view. I think everyone has memories from their childhoods that bother us. I'm 24 years old now, but this is something I'll never forget. When I was in elementary school, I did what was called the extended day program, which was just daycare after school for kids whose parents worked late, or it was just for kids whose parents needed a place for them to make friends. This happened to me when I was in 2nd grade and was 7 years old at the time. My parents worked late on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, and my older sister Alyssa had a part-time job at McDonald's at the time. Usually my parents would pick me up, but on Tuesdays and Thursdays my sister picked me up at around 4:30, about an hour and a half after school had ended. I still vividly remember it was a chilly but not cold day in March, and we were on the playground running around. It was around 4:10 when the teacher that was monitoring play, Mr. McCann, told me I was going home. Mr. McCann walked with me back into the school, where I grabbed my backpack and walked out into the lobby. There I met a young woman, no older than 30, and she looked huge to me at my age, but in reality she was probably only 5'2". She was skinny and had long dark brown hair with tan skin and a pointy nose. She was wearing a ton of makeup and had a tattoo on her left arm. That's about the best description I can give. She bent down and asked if I was Dylan, and my stupid ass said yes. She introduced herself as Heather and said that she worked with Alyssa, and that since Alyssa had to work extra late, she'd asked her to pick me up. A little side note. She'd not actually mentioned Alyssa by name. She'd just said, "I work with your sister, and this will be important for later." She grabbed my hand and we walked to her car together, and obviously I didn't think anything of it, because I was so young and innocent. When we got to her car, Heather offered me some M&Ms, and again another red flag. But my naive ass thought she was just being nice, so I ate them. I know what most of you are probably thinking, that luckily they weren't drugged. But at first nothing seemed off. Heather took me the same way my parents and my sister would always take me to and from school, but it wasn't until she passed by my street that I started to realize something was off. I told her that we'd passed it, but she just responded by saying, "Okay," and kept going down the main road. And it wasn't in the caring, friendly tone she'd had when I met her less than 30 minutes before. She now seemed cold, and I didn't really care about how nervous I was. I asked her if she could get me a Happy Meal, and she responded by yelling at me, "Shut up, kid." A couple of minutes' silence passed as she continued driving, until I asked her if her and Alyssa were friends. And her response? "Who's Alyssa?" Who's Alyssa? The two words that made my heart, lungs, and every other organ in my body drop to the pit of my stomach. Even as a kid, I knew this meant she didn't know me. I started crying, afraid of what was going to happen next, and Heather kept screaming for me to shut up, even reaching over and slapping me a couple of times. Eventually, she got so fed up with me that she pulled over, put the car in park, and pulled a roll of duct tape out of the center console. Then, just like in an action movie, a police car pulled up behind us. This made Heather drop the duct tape, then she proceeded to put the car back in drive and floor it down the road. We were on a 30-mile-an-hour road, but she had to be going at least 60, maybe 70. This lasted for about 5 minutes, and I kept crying as Heather floored it down the road and through turns at ridiculous speeds. Eventually, we came upon 2 police cars blocking the road, which made Heather slam on the brakes, sliding to a stop just before she hit the police cars. She got out and started running, but luckily the cops were quick enough and they were able to stop her before she ran into the woods that were along the road. And that was that. As Heather was taken to one of the police cars, one of the officers took me home in his car, doing his best to comfort me. When I got home, Alyssa was sobbing as she hugged me for about 2 minutes straight, and my parents both got home not long after. They were also really upset, and that night they had a very long talk with me about stranger danger, and the police came to check on us and ask me more questions. It turned out Heather wasn't her real name, and that she had no connection to my sister like she'd said she had. And even though I had no idea at the time, her boyfriend was a suspected child trafficker who was later found guilty. Looking back on it now and knowing that makes me feel even more lucky. But what still really confuses me is how Heather, or whatever her name is, knew who I was. Keep in mind that I was only 7, and this was before cell phones and social media were big. I do have one theory, that Mr. McCann, the teacher that ran the after-school program, was fired after this incident, and I saw on the news many years later that he was charged with touching a kid at another school, and he killed himself the day before he was supposed to go to trial. I think there's a chance that maybe him and Heather were in cahoots, but I'll probably never know for sure if my story and Mr. McCann are connected. Kids, be very careful with adults and always listen to your parents when they warn you about the dangers of the world. And parents, please, for the love of God, teach your kids about stranger danger and not to get in cars. Luckily, the school handled it pretty well, but I want to remind schools to be vigilant about taking care of kids, especially young ones. Hopefully Heather is either in jail or got some kind of help, and she'll never try to harm another child again. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.